Hello everybody and welcome to this video coming to you from Rachel at Toll Genealogy. So you might be thinking, you might have seen mentions of genetic genealogy in the news, you're hearing about the latest criminal who's been caught using genetic genealogy, or the latest John or Jane Doe who's been identified using genetic genealogy, or you might read a story about, I found my sister or my brother or my dad or my mum, using genetic genealogy. But if you don't know anything about genealogy or DNA tests, you might be thinking, but what exactly is genetic genealogy? Well, that is what I am here to tell you about. So let's get into it. So, to work out or to understand what genetic genealogy is, you first need to know what traditional or, normal, as it's always been called, what normal genealogy is. So this is my definition, so other people may have other definitions, but traditional or paper-based genealogy to me is tracing your family history. Simple as that. People generally obviously know who their parents are, unless they're adopted or, have some kind of situation like that. They probably know who their grandparents are, but they might struggle to get further back than that unless they have a family member who's really into their family history. In my particular situation, my dad was very into his family history, so I pretty much knew most of my 2 times great-grandparents from my dad when I was 5 or 6. But if you don't have that, how do you find out? You do genealogy. So genealogy has you looking at documentary evidence or source evidence or other kinds of historical evidence. So documentary or source evidence might be things like your birth certificate, if you're married, your marriage certificate, and for relatives of yours who have passed away, their death certificates. All of those can be really useful documents for a family historian or genealogist. Other historical evidence would include things like wills or probate records, military records, that kind of thing. Source evidence would also include things like census records. So in England we have censuses that genealogists can consult from 1841 all the way up to now 1921. And we also have something called the 1939 register, which has the same kind of information that censuses have on them. Censuses tell you things like who was living in a particular household on the night in question that the census was taken. So they'll have the names, the relationships, the ages, and where the person was born and what their livelihoods were, what they did for a living. So obviously all that kind of information is really helpful for allowing you to trace your family history. Documentary evidence like birth certificates and marriage certificates, they're really useful because birth certificates obviously name your parents. There's generally an address somewhere on there for, not, it will say where you were born, which, in modern times that's usually in a hospital, but, when you're getting back to early 20th century births, those are generally at home. So that can give you an address to look for in census records and that kind of thing. Marriage records for England and Wales always listed the father's name and the father's occupation of both the bride and the groom. And for Scottish people, it listed the mother as well. So all of that is really helpful information to be able to get further back in somebody's family tree. So if that's traditional genealogy, what's genetic genealogy? Well, it's actually still the same thing. You're still using all those tools we've just talked about, those tools and techniques, But this time you're using it in conjunction with DNA tests and analysing those DNA tests. So when we say DNA tests for genealogy purposes, we're talking about your ancestry DNA, your 23andMe, your family tree DNA, potentially your living DNA, and MyHeritage. Those are the main tests that genetic genealogists would use in order to do, funnily enough, genetic genealogy. So genetic genealogy basically allows you to get where paper records don't go. So eventually, if you're doing family history research, eventually you will always hit a brick wall. And what we mean by a brick wall is there suddenly are no paper records to say who somebody's father was or mother was, or there's just too many. Say you hit a Welsh ancestor called, I don't know, Ellen Jones. You've got an Ellen Jones in your family. Well, in Victorian times, there's probably quite a few Ellen Jones in the same little bit of Wales. So that would be a brick wall. It can allow you to identify closer unknowns as well. So if there's an unknown father in your family tree, or there's some question about paternity for a particular person, or again, you have a really common name and you're not sure which is the right line to follow, DNA can help you there. DNA testing can also help you work out the precise genetic relationship between yourself and one of your DNA matches. So by that we mean you look at how much DNA you share with somebody and you work out what the possible relationships are. And then you're going back to traditional genealogy methods to see if you can work out the matches tree and then look at your own tree to figure out exactly where you fit with each other. So whenever we're talking about genetic genealogy, we're not talking about using it in isolation. In fact, it's pretty useless in isolation. We're always using it in conjunction with those traditional genealogy methods. It's an extra tool in our arsenal. So there are 3 kinds of DNA test. There's your autosomal, also known as @DNA. Both men and women can take this particular test, and usually when I'm talking about genetic genealogy, I'm talking about this test. So autosomes, that's your pairs of chromosomes that you have. So you get 23, 1 to 22 are known as the autosomes, and then the 23rd is your sex chromosome. So that's, if you're female, you have 2 X's, an X from your mother and an X from your father. If you're male, you have an X from your mother and a Y from your father. So as I said here, an autosomal test usually looks at X DNA as well, although it's not that helpful for genetic genealogy purposes because of the way you inherit it. It rarely changes. So although it has been helpful in some cases for me before, it's definitely not what I would suggest for a beginner to start with. Start with your autosomal. And then if you're male, you can take a Y DNA test as well. I would always recommend for genetic genealogy purposes, you take family tree DNA's Y37 test. But again, this isn't for beginners. Unless you have a specific reason to do a Y DNA test, I would start with autosomal. And finally, you have mtDNA, which that's mitochondrial DNA. So we all get that from our mothers. As I've said there, it's not that helpful for genetic genealogy. It's interesting, not that helpful. So how do you become a great genetic genealogist? Well, I'm glad you asked. I mean, technically I asked to make these slides, but anyway, I digress. So You need to be really good or really interested at detective work. Data analysis is a really, really good key thing to have. It enables you to spot patterns at a glance. I did a law degree at university, and although obviously I never went into law, I'd say the analytical skills that I developed on my law degree are why I'm such a good genetic genealogist. You need to have excellent research skills. Again, I'm going to credit my law firm days for this one. And then this is my favourite. You need logical reasoning skills. Channeling Sherlock. And you're probably wondering why there's a picture of two cats looking at a family tree at this moment in time. And the reason for that is because they are my two kitty cats, who are called Sherlock and Holmes. As you can see, they're very fascinated by that particular family tree. And this is the biggest one, and actually this can trip you up as well. For the personality traits. Yeah, stubbornness and determination. I'm not sure if this is the best compliment I ever had or kind of the worst insult, that I just don't let things go until I've found something out. Yes, so if that's you, you can probably become a great genetic genealogist. So that's it. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear them. Just pop them in the comments below. Also, if you subscribe to the channel or subscribe to my website, to the newsletter that I have there, there's going to be a whole series. So there's going to be, once a week, I'll be doing kind of learning topics like this, but I'll also be doing 2 new things that I have dreamt up. One is called DNA with me. I know, right? And the other one is, funnily enough, called Genealogy with me. So I'm going to take you along on my actual DNA research. It's going to be anonymized, so you won't, I'm not going to be spoiling anybody's private information, but, well, other than my own, I guess. Okay, anyway. So, if you want to know a bit more about how research works in practice, I definitely recommend you watch that series. The first episode should be coming in a few days. And Genealogy with me is going to be the same kind of thing. So, yeah, definitely check back to watch those. And yeah, see you then. Bye.